Wherever we go, we are gonna do what makes us feel right. I'm just getting off the train.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning, folks. How's everybody doing? Thank you so much for joining the Soul Purpose Show. I am Keith, one of your co-hosts.
And I am Monica.
My lovely wife.
Yes, I am.
As of this morning.
Well, I mean, unless you make a decision that you're going to leave. But...
Thank y'all so much for joining us. We are in the middle of a historic month. And not just that, this is a historic year. I mean, I think that history will show that 2020 was really just unprecedented on so many levels. But the cool thing is something happened this month that really literally might change the course of history for forever. So we really do thank everyone for continuing to tune in. So last week we were able to we had guests that unpacked and gave us some insight into all of the potential vice presidential running mate candidates for former Vice President Joe Biden.
Yep.
And the response to that show was incredible. It's been viewed over 2,000 times. So we're really grateful and thankful for everyone for
so thank you, Bamitra and Ed, for joining us last week. We are hoping to get them back on. The Democratic National Convention starts on Monday. So going to get those two heavy hitters to kind of try hopefully come back to kind of unpack the DNC convention and kind of the Democratic platform as they unveil it next week.
So what happened? So what happened this week?
There's so many things that happened this week.
Whatever.
The list is so long, but the highlight was, at least for me, so if y'all watched the show last week, we talked about all the VP contenders. And Ed and I were Kamala Harris. If y'all have followed if you all are followers of my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, you know that I was riding with Senator Harris from day one. It was very sad when she decided that she would end her presidential run, but Joe Biden, listened to Black women, which is what I said early on once he got the nomination, that if Black women wanted a Black woman to be on the ticket, we needed to use our voices and scream and shout, and we screamed and shout. We had some Black men that screamed and shouted as well.
Absolutely.
And he chose Senator Kamala Harris from California as his vice presidential running mate. So I was excited, does not adequately express how I felt.
She's very loud, out of control.
Well, technically not. He was on a conference call. And so I think around the same time that the announcement came out, I literally held my breath, ran into our room and screamed and then hyperventilated. And then my sister had to tell me to calm down. That's how excited I was. So I am ready to work for this Biden-Harris ticket. I was on a conference call earlier today about strategizing and how we're going to get this thing done.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that 2020 has sucked. Like, let's be clear, but that for sure was the highlight of my year.
Okay,
so far, because it's August.
So slow your roll.
All right, well.
Because the election is not for another 80 plus days.
80.
For another 80 days. And we know that even though that Vice President Biden is leading in the polls and also had a record-breaking fundraising month or week, excuse me,
$48
million in 48 hours, which is incredible. The reality is there's still a lot of work to do. Mm-hmm. And the one group that might be standing between victory and defeat for the Democratic ticket, at least, may not really be totally energized to work on behalf of this ticket, because there were some rumblings following the announcement that the swing group, which is young voters between the ages of 21 and 35, may not have been completely excited by the Kamala Harris pick. So, we have that very group is represented on our show today, and we're going to hear from them directly.
Yes. So I am excited about this group of younger people, and I did not ask anybody's ages. I just made the assumption that everybody was younger than us. So if I was wrong about that, y'all look real good in Black Done Crack, but we made the assumption that all of y'all were younger than us, and not in our generation, because you're you're kind of a baby boomer generation X.
No,
So at any rate, so we made that assumption. So if that was the wrong assumption, then God bless you because y'all got good genes. But so we have Alicia, Jasmine, Brian, DeMarc, and Maya on our show. So we are thrilled to have y'all on. But we wanted to start the conversation off with DeMarc, who has launched this initiative. You all know that this year, because I said at the beginning, 2020 has sucked. We lost three, but we lost two real civil rights icons this year. Reverend C.T. Vivian, and most recently Representative John Lewis, who we all know was both of them extremely instrumental in the passing of the Voting Rights Act. And so DeMarc Liggins, who is, he's a HBCU grad, I think Alabama A&M or Alabama State. Take your stuff off. Take your stuff off mute, DeMarc.
Oh, sorry, no, Alabama State.
ASU. Okay. I see. I see it. So DeMarc and one of his friends, and his name is escaping me, have created this initiative called my54.org. And if you all are familiar with the march from Selma to Montgomery, which was the march where John Lewis is renowned for being at the head of that march, almost dying, getting his skull cracked in that march. 54 miles they marched from Selma to Montgomery. And that is what was the impetus for the my54.org. So
tell us what that's all about. Man.
And first off, thank you guys for having me on your show. I'm so excited to be on and hear the panelists. I'm excited about this entire process. But My54 was started with myself and a friend of mine that I named Mark Spat. Mark and I met at the Black and Jewish Coalition here in Atlanta that was co-founded by John Lewis during the Civil Rights Movement. And in their passing, we were kind of talking, and he's like, we've got to. He was minded of something Rabbi Heschel said, who actually walked with Dr. King in the Selma March. And he says, how do you feel? He said, Rabbi Heschel says, it feels like I prayed with my feet. And so we kind of started playing with this concept, play with your feet. And one of the things that always kind of impressed me when I had an opportunity to work with C.T. Vivian, he always used to say, DeMarc, good people do good things because it's good. That's it. And so we try to figure out how can we come up with something that would honor their legacies. We don't want to speak on their behalf by any stretch of God's imagination. Their legacy speaks for themselves. And we want to talk about how it inspires all of us to do something. And so we launched My54 as an initiative where people can go to a site, reflect on their lives, and more succinctly, talk about how that inspiration of them leads all of us as individuals to make the world better. How do you move your 54? What's the 54 miles? What's the thing that you would do inside of danger? Like you were saying with Representative, what would I cross a bridge with dangerous people on the other end for? What is my 54? And that's what that concept is about, is trying to figure out a way to honor their legacies in a way that inspires each of us to do our part to make this world a more beloved community.
So one of the things, and I will admit, I have not walked. I've shared and I've encouraged, but I have not yet walked. But one of the things that I know in following your social media page is that one of the things that you're doing is you are walking between now and I think it's August 28th.
Yes.
So tell us about that, about kind of what you're doing and what you're encouraging people to do in support of the My54 initiative.
Awesome. And thank you for the sharing. Because like we said, it's all about pray with your feet, share with your feet, and put your faith over fear. But when people going to my54.org, they're signing up. We are encouraging people to get active. We're in this COVID street, so we can't, get together and do it together. So we have to figure out a way to do that purposeful energy at home. And it's different flavors. We've got people who are biking. We've got people who are runners. I feel like the endurance community is kind of cheating because they knock it out 15 miles at a time, unlike myself. But no, people just have different ways of engaging. But yes, we do want people to engage, but it's about the sharing of their stories and what's their inspiration that I think makes the most sense. I would be remiss, there are people who either can't or choose not to do 54 miles. So we've had people who say, I'm going to register 54 voters. I know one of the people that was in our project, me and Mark's Project Understanding class, he was like, I'm going to contribute 54 days to organizations that feel like what I'm looking to change. So it's something that we hope people can go to that website, the My 54 org site, and really own it and own what makes them want to move. And of course, if that's active, fantastic. But if there are other ways people can be involved, or if you're coming in kind of halfway in, you're like, I know I'm not doing 54 miles in 2 weeks, then it's all fine. It's all about, it's at the end of the day, it's all about trying to encourage the purposeful movement towards what your 54 is.
And the end date is August 28th, right?
Yes, yeah. We started it on CT Vivian's birthday, and when it ends on the 28th, of course, which is where the March on Washington, and John Lewis was the youngest speaker. That was a part of that Big Six on that historic day.
Outstanding. So I'm super excited. I'm actually I've done a little bit of jogging, but I'm kind of rehabbing myself physically, so I'm not fully kind of engaged yet. But I do love to bike, and I plan on doing most of my 54 on my bike, and I'm absolutely committed to completing it before the end of the month.
And so for our viewers, it's my54.org. They still can go sign up.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And then whatever way you want to acknowledge and represent that 54, it's on you. You just want people to be engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very much centered in a theme to inspire individuals more than it's a come here what we have to always say. This is not about what the Mark thinks or the incredible team of people that's helping us do it. This is really about, putting people on the spot. What is Alicia McDowell's thing? What's Jasmine's thing? You guys are stuck because you're on my screen. What's your 54? And to be honest, I've just been super excited to hear what means something to people, because we have a lot of friends and we talk about politics, things like that, but getting to kind of know what actually touches them, a lot of times you don't know that. And so that's been fun for me. Even I was joking with Mark, we've been kind of working on kind of logistics on the back end. I didn't know that hunger was his big thing. I mean, I knew that he was a really good guy, but I didn't know that. So even even though we helped launch this, I didn't know that was his 54. So it's super exciting. And like I said, people can definitely go to my54.org. Same name on all the social media prints. So it's My54 on Facebook. It's My54.org on Facebook, My54.org on Instagram, and My54.org on Twitter as well.
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, listen, the stage is set, right? Blacks have the right to vote. We know that it was young people, Black and white, college students, et cetera, that really pushed the civil rights struggle and the right to vote over the finish line. And I'm glad you mentioned Jasmine, because we have a panel of folks today who literally represent young folks from all across the country. So Jasmine's actually tuning in today from California. So I'm interested in hearing the panel's thoughts on when you hear about the death of iconic civil rights heroes like John Lewis and like Representative Lewis and CT Vivian. Like what are some of the things that goes through your mind, being kind of a generation separated from or two separated from folks like that?
Brian, start with you. Y'all take yourselves off mute.
I wanted to start with Jasmine.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
She's tuning in from California.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I want to also thank you all for inviting me on the show. But to get to your question, I have a few civil rights leaders who I just stand, and John Lewis was definitely one of them. For many reasons, I feel like his legacy it transcended across time, across generations. He went from starting off with the civil rights movement to moving on to gun rights to moving on to just equal rights and human rights for people. And I think that's something that really speaks to me. And I think it's something that speaks to a lot of young people in general, because or at least from my perspective, I think we focus a lot more on intersectionality and how our different identities all meet up into one, and how we can fight for and speak up for all of those intersectional ideas and identities. But yeah, he was 23 when he started doing the civil rights movement, when he spoke at the March on Washington, and then he was 25 when he was on the Selma Bridge. I'm 25 right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
what he was doing at 25 years old, and that speaks to me. And then he's literally in old age, he's sick, and he's doing sit-ins on the floor of Congress for gun rights after Pulse. He went to the Black Lives Matter mural in Washington, D.C. and acknowledged it and stood with the new generation of which is a multiracial, multi-ethnic generation, and supported us and supported the Black Lives Matter movement. And so like, I just feel like his legacy was that he was just someone who just uplifted people, uplifted humanity. And so I think he brings out a lot to my generation. Specifically, he brings out a lot to me.
Yeah.
All right. And you mentioned Brian. Now, Brian's actually tuning in from Chicago.
Chicago.
And there's a lot going on in Chicago. A lot happening in Chicago. Even though he's sporting his Pistons. What is that all about?
Take yourself off mute, Brian.
So first of all, I wear the Pistons hat on as many calls with my colleagues as I can. I cannot describe the anger and vitriol that I get on a daily basis by wearing this Pistons hat. Some parts of Detroit never left me, but but on this topic, I think what I appreciate about John Lewis specifically is that he leads with his values, and that's something that allows you to remain relevant over time, right? Because we know that right, young people are often, with their screaming and yelling, 20 to 30 years ahead of where like mainstream society is. And I think what happens a lot, and a lot of the tension that comes with some of the old heads and younger people, is that some of the old heads, like I don't want to say like to their detriment, but they're often, their contacts that they apply may stay in the 60s or 70s. And John Lewis is one that was constantly adapting and constantly bringing his like overarching values to present day times, which I think is one thing that allows us as young people to really identify with him. But, and this is not a slight against John Lewis at all, but I mean, thinking of myself as an educator, one thing I also think about is I'm not sure that everyone in our generation necessarily is like actively thinking of John Lewis in their head, because that's not what we're taught in our schools, right? When we think of like what Black students are taught in this education system, we don't, we should be spending, semesters on John Lewis and the Civil Rights Movement. We're only getting snippets of it. Yeah. And so you have a young generation of people that don't know how to contextualize John Lewis in the fight, often until you go to college, when you get a lot more exposure to like actually like explore different types of things. So I think it's sad at the same time, and I don't blame those young people. It's not their fault for the education that they receive, but I think it's also sad that we, as a whole generation, aren't able to necessarily contextualize John Lewis and other civil rights leaders in the way that we really should be.
All right. Maya.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Monica and Keith, for having me. I think this conversation is so important and so timely because as we prepare not only for November, we have an election on Tuesday, when a lot of these civil liberties that John Lewis and so many others fought about are going to be on the ballot. In Florida, we've seen across the state, state's attorneys who have attempted to roll back our progress in terms of criminal justice reform and the acknowledgement that Black lives really do matter. And all of those things are going to be on the ballot on Tuesday. And how are we showing up to not only honor his legacy, but also move it forward, right? And there's a piece of this work for all of us. And to Jasmine's point, John Lewis was an organizer. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Like, he started off by organizing his community in Tennessee, at Fisk University, and then kind of ascended to be this leader that we know him to be today. And that really is a nod to the fact that all of us have a part to play in this movement, whether it be signing voters up to register to vote by mail, we're moving them, and the work that DeMarc is doing, or is it amplifying like conversations like this and tuning in, right? Like all of our pieces in the movement are unique, individual, but they're all required and necessary. And I think for me, I had the opportunity to meet John Lewis last cycle during the 2018 election cycle. He was at a Get Out the Vote rally with Andrew Gillum and Sean Shaw and others right before Election Day. And I've never been starstruck in my life. That was the first time. I honestly couldn't say anything because his presence is so chilling and not in a bad way, but it's just like you have to honor that this man has literally committed his entire life to fighting for justice, right? And that just motivated us to do more and to be more. And that means that we have to all work together to keep bending the arc of justice to where we need it to be.
I'm really anxious to jump into to our other topic today, Alicia, and that is the selection of the vice president running mate, your sorority sister. But when Kamala Harris, when the announcement was made, I mean, we can't even really talk about Senator Harris without really kind of making reference to, especially amongst this group, the progressive ideology, right? So Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren really resonated with the younger, voting population. So I'm really anxious to get some perspective from you guys on how you process that when the selection was probably not the same individual that's tied to a lot of the strong progressive ideology. So,
Licia,
get your thoughts on that.
Licia.
So I noticed something really stark when the announcement was made. So I was looking at my Facebook timeline and I was looking at my Twitter timeline, and it was night and day. It was two completely different reactions to the announcement. So Kamala is also my soror, and I have a bunch of AKs on my Facebook, all older sorors from my chapter and beyond. It's funny, like when you cross, like you get so many AKs that just like randomly add you. But but it was all this celebration and skiwi and HBCU proud, because a lot of them also went to HBCUs, and this is where we need to go. This is the right choice. Like this is what's gonna solidify our win in November. That was the Facebook side. And then the Twitter side was literally just jokes. Like it was just it was straight jokes. And so it was, there were jokes about Kamala being a cop. There were jokes about how she's been disingenuous. There's a joke about her just in general not really resonating with us as younger people. And I thought it was interesting because, especially as we are having this conversation now, because of the generational divide, you never really think of Kamala as like being someone who should like resonate with older voters versus younger voters. Like there's nothing particular about her that is like, yeah, she definitely should resonate with one over the other, but the difference is still there. And so I think that as we get further into the conversation, it's going to be super important for her to figure out a way to resonate with, and I'm 26, so with that 21 to 35-year-old crowd, because right now we're just not feeling we're going to vote. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. I'm going to say that a million times. We're going to vote, but are we necessarily going to be the ones out in the streets, knocking on doors, canvassing, doing all of this, donating for her? For the Biden Harris ticket, that's kind of up in the air. We're just gonna go, we're gonna throw that vote in, and we're just gonna keep it pushing.
So let me ask this question, because I think perhaps the difference between Twitter and Facebook probably is generational, because I don't use Twitter. I have a lot to say, and I cannot be limited in however many characters they limit me to. That's probably the lawyer in me. But so I think the Twitter, Facebook, which is interesting, is probably generational. But to your point, Alicia, even though, so there is I'm sure Keith will get into this about the fact that people believe that y'all generation doesn't vote anyway. Y'all are protesting the street, but y'all don't vote. But what is it that she can do, or is there anything that ticket can do to get you all excited, to go out and wave signs and to register folks? Is there anything that can happen that she can do?
I'd love to hear from Jasmine, and I want to hear from Maya, because I think she's not going to join us in the second half of the show, so we definitely want to hear her perspective. So Jasmine, what can be done to resonate with her?
So I'm personally, I'm a big Kamala Harris fan. But I have been hearing the same things as Alicia talked about from my peers who are just not as excited. Some things that I think that she can do is, and some things I've seen that Joe Biden has been working on is trying to adopt more progressive policies. We want to see, I want to see Medicare for all. They haven't got there yet, but I'm hoping that as time goes on, they're going to get there. I want to see the Green New Deal adopted. I want to see more jobs brought back to America for people my age, in the future, people that are going to be my age in a couple of years. They can have opportunities for jobs that doesn't revolve around getting into a lot of debt, going to a college for a degree that they may not ever put into place or may not ever be able to find a job for. So adopt progressive policies, talk about those progressive policies, go and talk to or Zoom talk to younger people and directly address us. Don't dismiss us. One thing that we hate is being dismissed in any shape or form. Like, don't tell us that we don't know better, that we don't have the experience to make these decisions, that we don't understand what we're facing in our own lives and are not able to articulate how we want to be served by our elected officials. So be willing to have a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation with us, are some important things I think can be done to bring more younger voters on the side of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And also just be real about like what has happened in the past, address it, acknowledge it, move forward from it. So those are some things that I would say. I know Maya has a lot of great things.
Maya.
No pressure, Jasmine. Geez. But I do. And I think a couple things, right? Like, I saw also the commentary on Facebook, Twitter, and what burdens me, I think, about it is that a lot of people have this perspective that Kamala Harris was chosen because we needed to recruit or pull more Black people into the party to vote for a Joe Biden presidency, right? And let's be very clear, Black women have completely and have consistently carried the Democratic Party over and over and time again. So to have that perspective, to me, is demeaning to the work that Black women do all the time to ensure democratic and progressive policies. So I had to get that out. And then the second thing I think is also important is that young people continue to see voting in the elections process as like a savior, right? Like, the people that we elect and nominate to run for public office aren't necessarily the folks who are going to fix all the world's problems, right? And unfortunately, we always have this purity test on like, okay, if they don't hit 100% of these boxes, I'm not doing anything, right? Like, again, I think what Congressman Lewis's legacy was a nod to was that we have to make progressive steps to get to where we need to be in terms of equity and justice, right? And so to continue to not participate because folks don't show up in all the ways that we need them to is damning to us, right? Like, because we continue to forfeit the opportunity to push conversations to where we want them to be. And then our lack of participation helps the other side continue to do this foolishness that they're continuing to spew and do, right? And so I think when it comes to what the Biden-Harris ticket needs to do to help young people be energized and to show up is create space for us to do that, right? And I think particularly what we have to think about in the organization of campaigns is like all these people who work on these campaigns most times aren't local people, right? Like, we see folks come in from out of state, and we can have a sidebar conversation on whether that's a good idea or not, but it's the relationships that people have on the ground that pulls people into movements, right? When you get these conversations from volunteers or organizers, it's usually a personal story that connects to you, and that's what motivates you to go out and vote. And until we have those people show up and get involved in the campaign, like, how are we gonna make those personal connections and those personal stories that inspire young people to do that? If young people aren't involved in the campaign, like, what's the recruitment process gonna be like? So we have to ensure that the campaign is being inclusive, not just to young people, but particularly to young people of color, and elevating them on the staff process And shout out to, there was a young rattler who just got nominated, who was just appointed, Vince Evans, to be the political director for Senator Harris, as you know, in her vice presidential bid. And so we need to create more spaces like that to, you know, motivate and show that there's representation there.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, listen, we're gonna, and thank you, Maya, so much for your perspective. I know that you actually work on campaigns and that you are a strategist, and so it's really good that we get an opportunity to hear from someone who's really kind of on the ground. And I know that you've got to get to work because you're working on campaigns now. So we appreciate you joining us for our first half. And DeMarc, let me tell you, when we come back out of the break, right? Maya touched on this. Like, young people, this group votes emotionally, right? To like almost to a fault. And so I'm very curious to hear from you how you are shaping the My 54 message to actually resonate with young people who didn't, you know, march in the streets and march to Selma, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm definitely curious to get your perspective on that. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you again, Maya.
Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Playing your favorite old school. Today's R&B. With a smooth touch of jazz. You're listening to In Touch Radio.
Welcome to Calvin's Barbershop.
You all got to see this.
I don't even want to know what you're looking at on that phone.
Well, you should. I was learning about the dangers of high blood pressure and that we need to get ours checked regularly. High blood pressure can increase the risk of heart attack or stroke, but this text program can help keep it at a healthy range. Just text Barbershop to 97779 to sign up.
I'll get right on it as soon as I'm done with this baby panda video.
Text Barbershop to 97779. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
It's important to plan ahead for emergencies, like the storm. When it kicked in, we had a plan.
Separated.
We were able to get in touch with each other in no time.
Idea how to find each other.
The whole experience was fine.
the most frightening 10 hours of my life.
If there's one piece of advice I'd offer other moms out there, it's to stay calm and keep to the plan.
Some parents plan ahead, some don't. Make sure you know where to find your family in an emergency. Start your plan at ready.gov. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
By now, we're all aware of the dangers of COVID-19. Like others with existing health issues, cancer patients are at a high risk due to their compromised condition. If you are newly diagnosed with cancer, your care likely can't wait. Moffitt Cancer Center is the best place for your cancer concerns and to provide guidance to help you plan your next steps. We're here for you. Call 1-888-456-2839 or go to moffitt.org/here-for-you.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe. Wherever we go.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. We're going to move into the second half of our show. We had some outstanding commentary during the first half. We have a special guest on our show, DeMarc Liggins, who actually founded a really, really innovative and interesting movement called My 54. And DeMarc, you actually opened up our show today, giving our audience some background on exactly, you know, the life and the legacy of Representative John Lewis. And they're going to look. They're those who argue that the younger generation of voters are entitled, that you're just used to being spoon-fed, that you don't fully kind of understand the struggles of the civil rights movement and everything that everyone went through. And so now you've come out with this initiative, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on what kind of things are you doing to help resonate, you know, with the younger voters who arguably are going to be the swing vote for this election.
Well, I think that when Jasmine spoke earlier today, she really kind of touched to the heart of it, which is, you know, a story about like a John Lewis, a story like a C.T. Vivian. One of the things that's happened is that they did commit their lives to doing this work. And so a lot of people got introduced to them when they were already 65 plus, they were already 70 plus. And so we have this tendency to remember them, if you're a younger person, as a old person doing advocacy. But in real life, they weren't. You know, they were 23, they were 25. I know, you know, as you guys know, I work for the SCLC. You know, Bernard Lafayette, who's very close to John Lewis, you know, they were two roommates that just were going down to Freedom Ride just to take advantage, not to take advantage, to demonstrate and execute what the Supreme Court had just done, like before it was Freedom Rides, right? And so when you talk about young folks and what like a my 54 particularly, because you asked about it, this is not, it's about John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, but not in some type of, oh, let's have a history book about them. They will have amazing books written about them. They have amazing books written about them. It's not about that. It's about taking their story and what does that mean to me? And as a young person, I think that there are few people that are as inspiring to a young person as a John Lewis. When you're talking about someone who in college and I talked to, when I was talking to Lafayette, I said, hey, you know, what happened in Nashville? Because wait a minute, something happened in Nashville because C.T. Vivian came out of Nashville, John Lewis came out of Nashville, Diane Nash came. I said, what happened? He said, oh man, Lawson happened. I said, well, we all went to a nonviolence training. And so I don't want to get off on that, but my point is that they took that opportunity to do a training and they decided as that group of people to say, we're going to be part of the civil rights movement and bring in voting rights justice and and civil rights to folk in this country. And to young folks right now that are looking to get engaged, again, their stories are not about learning about them in and of themselves as you become a historian. It's about what can I do? And I think that as young people become energized, the only thing I would suggest is, like them, stay energized. If you want to make the world a better place, go do that thing. I do think it's important to do that thing in a very informed way. I think you guys were talking about social media, some other stuff. You can't just always hear something from a tweet and understand that thing to be true. Go make sure that thing is true. If you're and put it to the test before you say, hey, you know, this person's about this person's not about this. I ask people, have you at least went to their website to see their actual platform, just to make sure that they're not doing the thing? Because I think a lot of the campaigns are struggling with, they actually feel like their messaging has resonated a little bit better because they actually have, to their perspective, tried to adopt some of these policies. Right. But if you don't go read the policy to know they adopted, then you could feel like you're not being represented when you are. And so, or vice versa, where you might assume that they have a platform position that they don't because you assume it. So, you know, be involved, get engaged. I like I said, use that inspirational energy to say what I am going to do. And one thing I'm really big on, particularly with the Mob 54, it's about you standing up in the space where you exist and affect that. You know, it's a lot easier for any of us to sit around and snipe about Trump or whomever you're fighting for, whoever you feel like sniping against. What can you do in your space? And I think if people own their space, their network, their social feeds, their families, their communities, their neighborhoods, we will move justice forward. And that's what Lewis's life was about. That's what Vivian's life's about. It's about how do we all individually push forward.
So I want to, that's phenomenal and very good advice that I hope if anybody's young is listening to. We have some young folks that are looking at it. Alicia pointed out though that the excitement about Senator Harris was a mixed bag. I've already explained that I was hyperventilating, so I was super pumped. But it appears that I'm interested in knowing what you all's reaction was to the selection of Senator Harris, because as far as I'm concerned, she was the most qualified holistically of the bunch that he was picking from. That's my perspective, right? And I know that I've heard Alicia mention she's a cop. She's not progressive enough. There's a sense of inauthenticity in she's not authentic, because I'm jumbling my words. So there's an inauthenticity, lack of authenticity within her. So I want to get you all's perspective, what was your response or what was your feeling or your thoughts when you heard that she was the pick? Brian?
Yeah, I'm gonna put Brian out there because I remember during the primary season, I remember who he was supporting, and it wasn't Kamala Harris. Yeah.
So Brian, what was your feeling and your response?
Well, I actually wasn't necessarily, I don't know if I necessarily threw my weight around or threw my support to anybody this particular primary season, because even from 4 years ago, I think my ideologies have become more nuanced. Although, no, I was definitely not supporting Kamala Harris. I will definitely be open about that. Surprisingly, though, I would say that my response when she was nominated, or when she was chosen to be the vice presidential nomination, was actually a bit of relief, because of the folks that I think that could be considered. I thought that she was a better alternative given the way that I see voting, particularly in the presidential election, right? And so I think a lot of those of us who would identify as maybe radical, so maybe beyond progressive even, see voting, particularly on a national scale, is about like, who can we best move, right? And so one thing Alicia mentioned that I think is important to point out is that, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, within my community of people, which is mostly, I would say, progressive to leftist folks of color, right? I know I'm plugged in with a lot of activists, with people who are just doing work in a lot of different spaces. Almost none of them were particularly excited about Kamala. However, I am pretty much 100% sure all of them are going to vote.
Okay.
And all of them are going to vote for Biden. And Kamala is absolutely not like a deal breaker for them, because at least I feel like that she's someone that can potentially be moved when we're screaming and protesting and yelling, because that's going to continue no matter who's elected, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's someone that can be moved. And the person in the White House right now is someone who we know we can't move on there's no working with him. There's no redeeming quality of him. But the other thing that I think is really important to add to this conversation is we have to be clear about who we're talking about when we're talking about young people, right? Because there's the young people in this group and our networks, which is probably largely college educated folks, people who are more likely to have jobs, more likely to have just like prospects in general. And keeping in mind that when we talk about like 18 to 24-year-olds and even expanding beyond that, most people don't have college degrees, right? Most people in general, and particularly within the Black community, right? So the college educated Black community and the college educated young folks, those people are more likely to vote. Those people are more likely to be protesting. The protesters are different from the non-voters in the politically apathetic. Most of the protesters are voting. It's the people who are protesting who don't have college degrees, and this is not to slight them, because we know all the structures that prevent them from attaining educational success. Those are the people that we need to engage if we're gonna move numbers. And I don't think we talk a lot about who those politically disaffected people are, because it's not the protesters who aren't happy, but they're going to vote anyway. It's the people who feel so disenfranchised by the system, they don't feel any type of connection to it. So that's like a lot of the young people in the families that I work with.
Okay. I'm gonna circle back to that because I'm taking notes. Alicia and Jasmine, I want to hear you all's what your response was, or what your feeling was once you heard that Senator Harris was the selection. Alicia?
Similar to what Brian said, I wasn't necessarily excited, but I was relieved, because I think that she was the best possible choice given all of the candidates that were presented. And I knew we were gonna, have our issues with her, and we were going to question whether or not we were going to be able to hold her accountable throughout this season. But also, if they win, I'm gonna say when they win, and moving forward, right, when they do win, the extent to which we're going to hold her accountable is also kind of up in the air. But at the end of the day, we have to get Trump out of office, and so that is our primary concern right now.
Okay, Jasmine.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I was a Kamala Harris fan from the beginning. I although I do think that she is more to the right of where I am, which is I'm pretty progressive myself. I thought that she was someone that, like Brian said, that could be worked with. I thought that she was someone that, if pushed enough, she would move her policy more to the left. When she, the day that she decided to get out of the race, I called my line sister and I was like, oh my God, I'm sad. I don't know what to do. Like, what am I gonna do? I don't want to support Biden or Bernie because I'm sick of like, oh, Caucasian men representing us in the presidency. That was like my big thing. But politically, I was more aligned with Bernie Sanders. But I mean, after Joe Biden announced, Kamala, I just feel rejuvenated. I was going to vote regardless. I was going to vote for Joe Biden. I was just going to suck it up. But I was not excited at all. I had no motivation. I'm just like, ugh, how do I explain this to my friends? How do I talk about this when I'm not even inspired, by him? But with her, I just feel an added rejuvenation, because now I feel like I have inspiration to go out and reach out to my friends and to talk about her record and to talk to them and ask them, like, what are you interested in and how can we work together to make sure that we are addressing our concerns to the people that are running for office and being an active part of the political process. So I know that people, like I said, are still not as excited about her or not as excited about the ticket in general. But I'm, as far as me, I'm feeling more ready to fight to get them elected. I'm feeling more ready to go out into communities virtually and talk to people about them and talk about their records and address whatever concerns people may have with her and him running for office. Because like Alicia said, we got to get Trump out of there. There's no up way with him in office. We have to get him out.
DeMarc?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, I definitely did not run into any room screaming and hyperventilating. I wouldn't say that. I was happy about the fact that the party itself recognized the contributions for what our sisters have done. That was something that I found to be important because I just do, and not because, I don't want to make it seem like it's a quota thing. I think it's almost offensive to make it seem like it's a quota. I just think we just had a lot of sharp sisters who deserved to be considered. And she was in that group of people, and I really didn't think there was a bad pick out of that group. Not that I wasn't excited about Harris. I just think it's really important for all of us, and particularly the kind of group of leaders on the phone, to kind of remember how to help frame it for everybody that we talk to. We're all Black. Well, I know I'm real Blacktivist on my inside, right? But politics is really not my lens in which I'm trying to express the totality of my Blackness. And so when you start finding candidates for political campaigns and you're trying to judge them on your Blacktivist card, you're not really comparing apples to apples, right? We've got to make sure we continue to remember that at the end of the day, every campaign is one thing. What candidate is versus another candidate, and of those selections, who's going to be the best for you? It's not that person is perfect or they're great or you're even endorsing their life. You're just simply saying that if this person is versus this person. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I mean, you have Trump Pence versus Biden Harris. That's just not a question for me in terms of why I vote for politics. Now, if you guys need to have all type of other conversations that are not political, yeah, we can do that. But I think it's important for those of us who lead in our spaces to make sure we mind our friends and our family what the frame of a candidacy is about. Because at the end of the day, Biden Harris is not getting to run against our perception of what we want for Black America. Biden Harris is running against Trump Pence. That's it. And if you get your eye off that ball, you get yourself way down these kind of streets of conversations about things that have nothing to do with what's on that ticket. Trump Pence versus Biden Harris, it should be hopefully a no-brainer. And I think everybody said it best. I think we always have to continue to fight. I think, Monica, you led with the whole, we've got to make sure we remember politicians aren't our saviors. We've got to keep active anyway. I don't care if it was, Harris, Obama for that matter. We got to keep making sure that what we feel, we advocate for, no matter who's there. But of what we feel, without trying to sound like I'm advocating for people, but I think it's an easy question in your own mind. Trump Pence versus Biden Harris should be a no-brainer because that's the only two tickets that are national tickets that we're voting in. So I was excited for the fact that I thought it would solidify the ticket, and hopefully gave me a ticket that I felt stronger for in terms of what reflected my value.
Yeah.
So listen, now, and Jasmine touched on something that I really want to get into as we close out our show today. I really hope you guys can join us at 12:30 because I definitely want to get more deeply into political ideology, progressive ideology versus race. But when you talk, Jasmine, about moving people closer to, or moving people more appropriately, moving people away from where they are and closer to less comfortable space, because the farther left they move, right, they're trying to appeal to this broader electorate. When I hear things like, well, we can work with her, we can work with him, we can start to push them, one way or the other, I am very curious to find out, how is it that someone who is not already there, who's someone that you've all admitted, he wasn't like overly excited, you didn't hyperventilate, but this is somebody who is now the choice. How do you start to take that energy then into actively trying to push people one way or the other? I'm really, really curious to find out how that happens. Yeah, go ahead, Jasmine.
Or Alicia, anybody.
Well, Maya said something that was really important before she left. She said that everybody has their role and they have to play it. And all those roles are important. So you have organizers for a reason. You have activists for a reason. You have people who run for office for a reason. They're not necessarily going to be all on the same page, but all of them working together is what gets us from Jim Crow to integration. All of them working together. It takes all of them in that coalition to move. And when I say that, I think Kamala Harris is someone that could be moved specifically. If you look at her, she was a district attorney during the tough on crime age. And while she was a district attorney, she did things that were tough on crime, that fit with what the criminal justice system was in 2002, 2003, 2004. But she also did progressive things. When she became AG, she did things that were also tough on crime, but she also did progressive things. When she became a senator, if you look at her legislation, the majority of the legislation that she has worked on, regardless of who she's worked on it with, whether it's working on it with fellow Democratic senators or fellow Republican senators, has all been, for the most part, focused on criminal justice reform. So when you're in a position, and you're an attorney, and I want to be an attorney one day, soon, and I want to be a prosecutor. When you're in that position, yes, you do have discretion, but you also are an enforcer of the law. And you have to enforce the law how the law is written. And right now, the law is not written for Black and brown bodies.
I'm so happy that you're saying that. Our actually next week's show is about the role of the Black prosecutor and the importance of the Black prosecutor. And so I'm very happy that because you are repeating the things that I've said repeatedly about. She didn't create the rules, right? She's a Black prosecutor. Her job as a prosecutor is to enforce the law. And if that requires some folks to get locked up because they're violating the law, then that's going to happen. But I think we'll probably get more time to talk about this in the second hour. Ryan talked about that politically disaffected. That's the piece. Her being a cop is the piece that is keeping them from being excited about her candidacy. But I want to get Alicia, everybody else on Keith's question.
I was just gonna say that I think it's.
You're muted. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
There we go.
There you go.
Sorry. So I was gonna say that I think what I've been doing that has been important, because there actually is a small niche of my community who are still on the fence about voting. The majority of my close friends and my close circle are definitely voting, but there are a handful, particularly in light of, Hillary Clinton still getting the popular vote and still losing the election. The fact that, that we haven't gotten as far as we should have, despite all of the protests. But one thing that I try to remind them is that, when we're voting for the presidency, we're also voting for the next Supreme Court justices. We're also voting for our secretaries, our Secretary of Education, our Secretary of HUD, and that we're also influencing a lot of the local politics that are happening that do affect us most immediately. And also those local elected officials are, they're easier, or they're more attainable. What's the word I'm looking for? They're more accessible. Yes, thank you. They're more accessible in terms of influencing them on an individual level. And so I try to, in terms of like, how do we get people motivated to go out and make sure they are voting for this federal office? It's just reminding them that while it might not seem so on the surface level, a lot of what we're voting for is actually things that are happening at other levels that we don't even think about it. So, and that, I think, also pointed to kind of what Brian was mentioning, that education piece, in terms of making sure that that those in our community who aren't educated, who might not know that, who might not realize that we're kind of connecting with them on a different level, and that we're not, I also want to throw this in, that we're not belittling them for that choice, for that initial, like, I'm not voting because it's and the third, because it's all very valid. And it's also valid to acknowledge that the disenfranchisement that's happening right now, like we see what's happening with USPS. So, you know, also acknowledging that, like, hey, I understand all this is working against you. However, like, how can we work together to make sure that you're voting, and that also that that you're encouraging others to vote, and that you're working within the selection.
Outstanding. Well, I know that we're coming up to the close of our show, and this has just been phenomenal. Just getting the perspective. We like to, those of us who are old folks.
I'm not old. Don't include me in that thing.
Those of us who are older folks, we love to sit around and really just kind of opine at how, you know, the younger generation, you know, they just they just don't get it. You know, they just don't understand it, and on and on and on. But we know that that's not the case. We know that there are a large group of you who are, you know, very engaged, very politically astute. I would love to, and I think I'm going to try to get DeMarc to take us home, but I'd love to have you guys come back at 12:30 for our after show. And the reason why is because I would really, really love to get from this group and to hear from this group this whole question over, you know, race versus political ideology. Somebody mentioned old white guy, right? So Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, old white people, really resonating with young people, with young people, black, brown, and white people.
Yeah.
So I really want to I really want to unpack that during our 12:30 show. DeMarc, do you have any closing thoughts for us and for this group relative to what you're trying to accomplish with My 54?
No, I mean, this has been fantastic. I would like to appreciate that all these young folks let me get called young. That doesn't happen to me a lot, so thank y'all for letting me stick into the Young People's Club for a few minutes. It makes me feel good. I mean, just in terms of the My 54 stuff, I think that everything about this conversation is the spirit of what we were trying to do, right? Which is, how do you take a legacy of somebody like a C.T. Vivian, a legacy of a John Lewis, but talk about who Brian Harris is, talk about who Jasmine is, talk about who Elise is. It's so much that. So this whole conversation just kind of delights me in that sense, because I think it reflects what we were trying to do, which is they have legacy, but you guys have your story and how you're going to make this world better. But shameless plug, of course, please I look forward to everybody going to my54.org, sign up on the site. I know it's an old people's site, but we are on Facebook. We're not that as active on Twitter. So I'm actually, when I think Alicia was talking about that Facebook Twitter split. So I've got that on my head. I'm gonna go back to the team like, hey, I think that we're showing we're old. So thank you for that. But no, we hope that everybody goes out. We hope that everyone shares their stories, and particularly, the site itself is not designed to necessarily like kind of move into advocacy spaces. But what we want is people's advocacy voices on it. So we really, really hope that everybody goes on with these type of conversations. Bring your perspective in. What's your 54? And let's get that. Let's echo what you're saying, and hopefully, let everybody else kind of see what you're saying. So that's where we are. And thank you again for having on the show. to talk about this initiative. Myself and Mark Speck and our team were able to get started.
And I want to encourage, we both want to encourage in Hillsborough County and in Florida, there are political races going on. Yes, we're talking and focusing on the presidential race, but there are local races going on right now. Vote on Tuesday. So Hillsborough County percentage is 16% turnout right now. All those young people protesting in the street. As I told one of my young sorority sisters, y'all protest and then y'all protest and walk yourselves to the voting booth and you vote. So voting on Tuesday for local elections. And then we're gonna get ourselves galvanized and organized to vote again in November. We appreciate y'all.
We are on In Touch News, internet radio, live all around the world. I cannot thank this panel enough for joining our show today. Please, please, please share and like our page. And please come back at 12:30 for Soul Purpose Lounge. We're going to be on Facebook Live. We're going to be talking about race and politics in addition to Kamala Harris. So, and we're going to talk about young people.
Yes.
By the numbers. So again, thank you. Thank y'all so much.
Peace. Have a good rest of the weekend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.